8 years after leaving his homeland in fear for his life, Muhammad returned to Mecca at the head of a powerful force. But this wasn't some brutal campaign of revenge. Instead, he returned with a strategy that would literally redefine the future of Arabia. We're looking at one of the most remarkable political and military turning points in history, the Conquest of Mecca.
So picture this. 8 years after being exiled, a leader marches back home with 10,000 soldiers. But again, it wasn't about vengeance. It was an absolute masterclass in political reconciliation. This event in 630 CE wasn't just a military win, it was a total social and diplomatic transformation.
Part 1. The peace treaty is broken. To really understand the stakes here, we've got to rewind a bit to 628 CE. The Muslims in Medina and the Quraysh tribe in Mecca had actually signed a 10-year non-aggression pact. It was called the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Now, this treaty allowed any Arab tribe to ally with whoever they wanted. So the Banu Bakr teamed up with the Quraysh and the Banu Khuzā sided with the Muslims. Simple enough, right? Well, not quite. Old pre-Islamic vendettas were still simmering just beneath the surface, and this fragile peace absolutely shattered when the Banu Bakr launched a surprise night attack against the Khuzā at a place called Al-Watir. But here is the critical detail. The Quraysh secretly supplied weapons and men for the attack under the cover of darkness.
After that massacre, the Prophet Muhammad honored his alliance and gave the Quraysh a strict ultimatum. He laid out 3 clear demands for reparations. 1. Pay blood money for the victims. 2. Cut ties completely with the Banu Bakr. Or 3. Declare the Hudaybiyah Treaty completely null and void. The Quraysh refused to meet those first 2 demands, and with that refusal, the truce was officially dead.
Which brings us to Section 2, the March of 10,000. It's Ramadan, 8 AH. Okay, so the treaty is broken. The Prophet orders a general mobilization back in Medina, and they pull this off with absolute airtight secrecy so the Quraysh spies wouldn't have a clue what their target was. By the time they actually marched out, the army had swelled to 10,000 heavily armed soldiers. To put that into perspective, early Islamic historians like Ibn Ishaq and al-Waqidi point out that this was the largest military force ever assembled in Arabia up to that point. Huge.
But here's the thing, they didn't just rely on brute numbers. They used some truly brilliant strategy. When the army camped at Mar Zahran, which is just a few kilometers outside of Mecca, the Prophet executed an absolute masterpiece of psychological warfare. Instead of sharing campfires, he ordered every single soldier to light their own independent fire up on the elevated hillsides. Just imagine being in Mecca, peering out into the pitch-black night, and suddenly seeing 10,000 individual flames lighting up the mountains. It created the illusion of this absolutely insurmountable, unstoppable force.
And guess what? That psychological pressure totally worked. Abu Sufyan, the chief of the Quraysh and a fierce longtime adversary, actually came out to investigate and ended up surrendering to the Muslim camp. As he watched these heavily armed battalions marching past, he turned to the Prophet's uncle, Abbas, in complete awe. He said, "I swear by Allah that the sovereignty of your brother's son has become too powerful to withstand." Realizing fighting was totally pointless, he rushed back to warn his city to stand down.
Section 3. A bloodless tactical victory.
So the Muslims had the numbers to easily crush Mecca, but destruction was never the goal. Mecca was and is a sacred sanctuary. To make sure there wasn't a bloodbath, they used a highly organized, multi-pronged entry strategy. You had Khalid bin Walid securing the lower avenues, Zubair bin al-Awwam taking the upper side, and Abu Ubaidah leading the infantry straight through a side valley. And these commanders were given strict, non-negotiable orders. Do not kill unless it's an absolute self-defense. And aside from one minor skirmish with some extremists, the city was secured entirely peacefully. Incredible.
Right after entering Mecca, the Prophet headed straight for the Kaaba. Now, for generations, this had been the epicenter of polytheistic worship, packed with idols from tribes all over Arabia. Islamic traditions tell us there were 360 idols surrounding the sanctuary. The Prophet proceeded to knock them all down. This was a massive moment. It symbolized the definitive, permanent end of polytheism in the sacred city.
And while he was clearing the sanctuary, he recited a really powerful verse from Surah Al-Isra in the Quran. The truth has come, and falsehood has vanished away. Surely falsehood is ever certain to vanish. You see, this wasn't just a military win. It was the theological climax of the whole event. It was a total reset for the spiritual heart of the Arabian Peninsula.
Moving on to Section 4, Amnesty and Social Transformation.
All right, so the city is secured. The idols are gone. The defeated Quraysh, the very people who had persecuted and exiled the early Muslims for over a decade, are now completely at the mercy of the man they ruthlessly fought against. So, what happens when you finally conquer those who exiled you? I mean, in 7th century Arabia, the logic of warfare usually dictated only one outcome: brutal, cyclical tribal revenge, mass executions, and enslavement.
But instead, the Prophet Muhammad turned to the Quraysh and asked them what they expected him to do. They pleaded for clemency, calling him a noble brother. And his response? It was this astonishing declaration. He said, "No reproach on you this day. Go your way, for you are freed ones." He was actually drawing a direct parallel to the Quranic story of the Prophet Joseph forgiving his brothers. He issued a blanket amnesty. No executions, no confiscation of property, no retaliation. Just forgiveness.
Modern academic researchers actually point to this exact moment as a radical departure from the dominant norms of tribal Arabia at the time. By refusing to retaliate, the Prophet actively dismantled the psychological walls between former enemies. He took a military conquest and transformed it into a meticulous process of deep, lasting social reconstruction. The entire paradigm of society shifted overnight. Think about it. The Jahiliyyah era of pre-Islamic Arabia was super fragmented. It was driven by these strict kinship loyalties and endless bloody cycles of revenge. But this emerging Islamic civilization, it introduced a completely new logic of power. It wasn't about asserting your tribe's dominance anymore. It was about building an ummah, a cohesive, unified moral community, built on shared ethical frameworks rather than just whose bloodline you belong to. To really cement this new reality, the Prophet delivered a profound sermon the very next day. He explicitly abolished that old pre-Islamic pride in ancestry. He told the gathered crowds that all mankind descends from Adam, and Adam was made of clay. He recited a Quranic verse declaring that the most noble person in the sight of God isn't the one with the wealthiest bloodline or the strongest tribe, but the most righteous. Talk about a game changer. This established a radically egalitarian framework for this newly integrated society.
Section 5. Securing the new era.
Because you see, the conquest of Mecca was really just the catalyst. The geopolitical shockwave was immediate, and things moved incredibly fast from there. So the army left Medina on Ramadan 10th and conquered Mecca on the 20th. But just the following month, in Shawwal, neighboring powerful tribes, specifically the Hawazin and Thaqif, they amassed 20,000 warriors to try and crush the Muslims before they could consolidate their new power. This sparked a really fierce Battle of Hunain and then the Siege of Taif, and ultimately the Muslims eliminated the last major pockets of tribal resistance there.
The legacy of these events completely redrew the map of the region. Seriously, decades of deep tribal fragmentation were entirely replaced by a unified Arabian Peninsula under one central moral and political authority. Mecca was permanently transformed into a safe sanctuary, and the Islamic State was solidified as this major, unified force that no single tribal alliance could ever stand against again.
So I want to leave you with this thought. If ultimate victory isn't found in destroying your enemies, but in transforming them into allies, how does that reshape our entire understanding of power? It's a profound historical lesson from 7th century Arabia that didn't just change their world, it changed the course of human history. And honestly, it's a lesson that remains incredibly relevant to statecraft and leadership today. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.